So welcome to June. This month we're going to be talking about mindfulness, and it is the perfect, Kelsey, it's the perfect time to talk about being and getting even more mindful of our thoughts, words, and actions, and how it is we get centered in the midst of things that could keep us from being mindful. And so I want you to know this talk was named sometime last year. Just breathe in the midst of all of this is a cosmic joke, not a personal one. It's allergy season, so forgive me. I'm probably gonna cough through this because well, you know what? Let's not affirm that. What I want you to remember is that the first and most fundamental thing you can do if things are a little bit wild is just stop and breathe. What stopping and breathing does is bring your mind back to what you're doing so that you're conscious of it. It places some time between cause and effect, between stimulus and response. And it also, for what it's worth, mindful breathing causes a physical shift in your brain. It helps balance something called noradrenaline, which allows you to really focus, to actually create new connections in your brain. And it allows us to think differently. When things are wild around us, when things feel out of control. Generally what happens is we go to our fight or flight response, we go into survival mode. Consciously breathing not only forces oxygen back into anything that might be oxygen deprived in that moment, but it also allows us to get back into the frontal lobe of our brain, the part that can think and plan and understand that our responses have consequences. Oh, and it is such a time to take a deep breath. So I'm going to ask you to right now. Just take a breath. It's part of the cosmic irony that we should be in the midst of this COVID pandemic, where the talk has been about being able to find enough respirators and what COVID does to your lungs, what the virus does to your lungs. Also, in this time of global change, global reaction to the words, "I can't breathe," that were part of what George Floyd said as he died. Oh, that's so heavy. Sometimes it makes it hard to breathe. I haven't been able to watch the video, but I will say I have had candles lit in bed in prayer during this time. I've had people say to me, so when are we ever going to learn? When are we ever going to get past the things we've done to the environment that might have supported the pandemic? When are we going to get past seeing people as the other and objectifying them, no matter whether this month happens to be Pride Month? And so at one point in history, many points in history, it's been different groups. So whether it's the LGBTQ community, whether it's people of color, whether it's women, whether it's blondes, it doesn't really matter. We have throughout history been trying to learn this one simple lesson, that we are all one. So breathe into that for me for a moment. Breathe into the oneness that we are privileged to experience this morning. Even now, in places in the United States, there are people who cannot get online. They can't afford computers, and internet access simply isn't possible in their town. And so we have the privilege of coming together now to share in this remedial humanity 101. Because it does kind of feel like we're in the remedial class right now. It was almost 6 years ago, next month, that Eric Garner was on the ground saying, I can't breathe. And so I'm going to remind you that there's stuff to learn and stuff to do with this, given the tools that we have. It is very heavy. And I've also heard people saying, you know, this science of mind stuff, this philosophy stuff, where was this when I was young? Where the heck was this teaching when I really, really needed it? Why did I have to wait till I was 65, 75, 85, whatever, to find this thinking, to start to learn that I am the beloved of the beloved? Well, guys, if you notice, the people who would normally be called elderly, who still are part of this teaching, they really don't act their age, and I love that about them. For those of you who remember Ruth Pike, who celebrated her she had a big party on her 100th birthday at the center. She was, even then, writing a book. I believe it had to do with quantum physics, and it wasn't her first book. She, right up until very late in her life, lived in her own home, continued teaching and reading and learning and doing woodwork and all sorts of stuff. It is not too late. It is never too late for us to change the way we're thinking, to walk away from that which is obviously no longer serving us, like a belief in aging or a belief in I'm too old to learn this. We can walk away from that at any point. The first time my grandfather went into a therapist's office, he was in his mid-80s. And so I would ask you to remember that that is my family knowing. That is my history. And so if you come to me and say, well, I'm 60 now, it's too late for me to make a change, I'm probably not going to believe you. And I'm certainly not going to be in agreement with you about that. So we're in this class on remedial oneness. And we're going to keep taking this class as a human race until we get it. Have you ever noticed that the stuff we can't figure out or the stuff we choose not to learn comes back to us in other forms? Kind of like marrying the same person over and over, even though they wear a different face. For many of us, it's one of our parents that we marry in a different body. We get multiple chances to learn this stuff. And the way we do it is by getting conscious. The time we're in now has so many parallels to the past and our other opportunities to learn oneness. In 1965 at the bridge in Selma, there was a Universalist Unitarian minister called James Reed. And he came down from Boston, a white man who chose to walk with Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. As a matter of fact, an entire third of that crowd walking across the bridge at Selma that time was white. But it was Reverend Reed who was killed that night for having done that walk. And now we have Sarah Grossman, who was part of a march in Columbus, Ohio. She was sprayed with some kind of chemical agent. People who were there say she was coughing blood at the end of the march. And when she finally went to the emergency room the next day, she passed away. It's possible it was an asthma thing. It's possible it was simply an allergic reaction to whatever was sprayed on her. We will continue learning these lessons over and over until we awaken, until we get mindful enough to see what it is we're doing. Not individually. This is not about, be embarrassed because you're a white person. I'm white, in case you didn't notice. And this isn't about we're all bad people because over the centuries we have excluded or cut away from people or created us and them. We've done that over and over again. And as a human race, we are learning. We are moving forward. But this is just the next iteration of us and them. Greater than, less than. Superiority complexes. You know, the thing with not being able to breathe. Many of you already know I deal with asthma. And when I was in college, I learned to deal with asthma without health care. And so if I was having a bad asthma attack, I would get in my car. I know. It's been more than 10 years. I'm sure that the statute of limitations on that is over. I would have to get in my car and just go to the restaurant I worked at and sit at one of the tables and drink tea, because it was the only thing that would start maybe loosening up that congestion. And I knew that if I was there, at least someone would see me if I passed out. Moving forward in time now, I have that wonderful little ventilator-y thing, the little reverse vacuum machine, whatever it's really called, that allows me to work on a bad asthma attack from home, knowing that I'm gonna be okay. Now, usually, while I am learning, I let that asthma attack get pretty serious before I pull out the more heavy meds, because I don't like them. But I've learned that the only way to get through that and get the medicine into me is to focus on my breathing. Not the idea or the belief that I cannot breathe, but breathing to the best of my ability, that little bit, those little sips of air that bring in enough of the good to eventually get the medicine where it needs to be. That's how most of us come into Science of Mind. I had a teacher who said nobody comes to Jesus on prom night. Most of us, when we came to Science of Mind, were barely sipping the air. And we came here and we learned slowly, and in some cases painfully, how to get this good stuff, these beautiful spiritual tools, breathed into us so that we could do our work, so that we could live that life that is beyond what we thought we could have. I've heard that, I've heard from my mother, who was an OBGYN nurse, that many, many women, when they get to the transition phase of giving birth, they reach a point where they lose all modesty, suddenly remember how to swear, suddenly remember who got them into this trouble in the first place and go after their partners. Sometimes, in my mother's case, she said, I've changed my mind. I think I'll come back tomorrow. But at some point, we don't get to stop this ride. At some point, we're in that transition phase and that baby's coming out. So we are birthing the world that works for everyone, and many of us, including me sometimes, are saying, I've changed my mind. I think I'll come back tomorrow. It's too late to come back tomorrow. You're halfway awake or more than woke, or the world is waking up, and we're not going to be able to go back to sleep. There was a time there's an area in the story of the master teacher Jesus, the night before he was to be killed. He knew what was coming, and he went to the Garden of Gethsemane and he prayed, if this cup can pass from me, if I don't have to do this, please, I don't want to. I'll do it, but I don't want to. And there's a large chunk of humanity right now saying the same thing. Jesus also knew that it was his spiritual community that would help carry him through. And so he brought some of the disciples with him. And what he said to them was, will you stay awake with me? There is a point in which this spiritual community can support you in becoming conscious, can support you in remembering to breathe. The apostles fell asleep, and Jesus was left to stay awake and accept this challenge on his own. There is also a degree to which, while your spiritual community can surround you, only you can say yes to the Great Awakening. You have to do that for yourself. So how wise was it for Spirit to trap us all in our homes where we really have to sit with ourselves, to give us this time outside of time? And I know many people have gone back to a close facsimile of their old life, but many are still, in their homes, isolated. Many of us still are in the process of waking up, are still in the process of remembering to breathe. Now, this would be going on with or without the pandemic, with or without the Great Awakening around the globe to our belief in separateness. Right now, the volume's been turned up. And I want you to understand that at this time, we are not, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's a painful thing. So is childbirth, but we don't say that that's a bad thing. As a matter of fact, some people look forward to it. I had a friend who jumped up and down saying, get it out at the end of her pregnancy. And, obviously she was not seeing childbirth as a bad thing at that point. What we really need is to remember who we are. To remember that there's a difference between faith in God and the faith of God. God, Spirit, the universe, whatever you want to call it, the infinite life is not questioning whether or not it's able to evolve. It's simply evolving through, in, and as each and every one of us. In the Science of Mind textbook on page 414, Ernest Holmes, the founder of this philosophy, the guy who literally wrote the books, wrote, to have faith in God is to follow this faith through by having faith in self. The real self is God, and as such is to be implicitly trusted. The spark which burns at the center of our own soul is caught from the living, eternal flame of the Spirit. Breathe that in. Just for a moment, breathe that in. And again, to have faith in God is to follow this faith through by having faith in the self. The real self is God, and as such is to be implicitly trusted. The spark which burns at the center of our own soul is caught from the living and eternal flame of the Spirit. That which is evolving in you is just the physical side. What's awakening you, what's always been there, is the divine Spirit, is the Christ consciousness that Jesus came to show us, is the Buddha nature that is yours inherently. You can't lose that. You might try to ignore it. But the Centers for Spiritual Awakening is on a mission to awaken humanity to its spiritual magnificence. Your spiritual magnificence is what you awaken to, not what you achieve, not what you learn to do. It's what you awaken to. It's already in there. And there is some part of you awakening now and remembering, just breathe. We breathe in, the word for that is inspiration. We awaken to the God voice within us when we breathe in, and then we breathe out, because that's just the law of circulation and how it works. As we give, so do we receive. If you don't breathe out at some point, you're gonna be in trouble. And so it was not surprising, but wonderful to me to hear Dave's Scherer's meditation this morning, which included the exercise that I was taught. When you breathe in, you just say, God is. And when you breathe out, you say, I am. God is, I am. God is, I'm hyperventilating now. God is, I am. The cool part of that is that those are the first two steps of what we call spiritual mind treatment. And if you notice, it is one breath. It is one circulatory breath, awakening those parts of your mind when you do it mindfully, awakening those parts of your mind that are of a higher thought than that little lizard brain in the back. If you will simply do that exercise, God is, I am, you will discover the truth of your spiritual magnificence. You will recognize God is, I am is redundant. It's two sentences that say the same thing. It's the truth of your being in 4 words. Now, if you have trouble just doing mantras, sing it. We did that at the beginning of service. I encourage you now to have a rebirth, to forge those new neural connections by breathing mindfully. And just like the pregnant women giving birth, it's important to breathe through it and stay with it, even if it seems painful, even if it seems hard and is getting harder. If you start to feel like you're faltering, call someone from your spiritual community and say, will you stay awake with me? Come with me to this Garden of Gethsemane and help me work through this. This is your spiritual magnificence awakening. And the power that we have as a community, the powerful tool we use is prayer. And so I'm going to prayer now. And I ask you to join me in the first 2 steps of treatment just by breathing in, God is, and breathing out, I am. God is, I am. God is, I am. From this awakened consciousness, from this spiritual revelation, all other truths become obvious, and that which was never true, like our belief in separation, our belief in us and them, that has never been true, and it falls away because we have awakened to a truth that is so bright and so beautiful, that is so filled with love, that there is nothing else to be or do or think about. Just the ultimate truth of God is, I am. And so today, right here, right now, in the midst of what looks like messy spiritual growth out in the world, I celebrate the true evolution that's happening, the true awakening that's happening. I celebrate that there is good for all of us in this. I bless it all. I know that while it might feel like hard work at the physical level, from the spiritual truth, what we all know is it's necessary, it's good, and it's entirely worth it. And so I bless it all. I call it good and very good. And so it is.